So I ran with my previous coach for about 6 years, starting in 2009. And I remember he used to go online and look up our race goal times on a website called McMillan, or maybe it was called the McMillan running calculator at the time. Either way, I remember sometimes feeling like times he would pull off this magical website were way too aggressive. But sometimes I was able to attain them, so I guess there was some sense to it. The one goal time that I don't seem to be able to get close to is the marathon. No matter how hard I train, it just seems like I'll never get there. Actually, all my PBs in the marathon happened when I was either training for something completely different or when I was injured for most of the training cycle. Well, it's a good thing we're reading all these training books, and today's book gave me a few more things to think about. Hi, and welcome to the Running Book Reviews podcast, where we review running books written for runners, about runners, and by runners to help you decide if you would like to read the book for yourself. We also hope that listening to us chat about running can help keep you motivated about your own running or maybe inspire you to try something new. My name is Liz, and with my co-host Alan, we're going to talk with author Greg McMillan about his book, You Only Faster.
You Only Faster. It puts a new spin on the training book. In this book, you get some good training principles, but Greg then uses them to guide you through a 6-step process to modify a training plan that you might get from a book or online to better suit you as a specific individual runner. So if the plan follows good training principles, why would you need to modify it, right? Well, you're an individual who responds and recovers differently to different types of workouts. And although everyone should be doing all types of workouts, the mix of how they're put together can be changed to better suit your individuality. Greg's 6 steps create the framework for the book, and he describes each step in several chapters. So let me tell you a little bit about Greg McMillan if you haven't already come across Greg and know a lot about him already. He has a master's degree in exercise physiology, where his research focused on the determining factors of distance running performance. A student of the sport since he began running in high school, he continues to apply advances in sports science to his training programs. As with his study of sports science, Greg continues to learn from the athletes and coaches of yesterday and today. He rigorously studies the great books on running and is eager to be around successful coaches and athletes to learn from their experiences. His mentors include the late, great Arthur Lydiard, who he toured with on Lydiard's last US tour, Olympic coach Dr. Joe Vigil, who we've actually done a podcast about the life story of, peak running performance founder Guy Avery, and US track and field physiologist Dr. David Martin. Among others, I would say. There's probably a list as long as your arm. Renowned by runners and coaches across the globe, Greg has one of the most diverse coaching resumes, with equal success coaching newbie runners, age groupers, Boston qualifiers, and Olympians. He's also the founder of McMillan Running, which includes his website with the famous running calculator that many runners are likely aware of. And maybe we'll hear more of that as we go down. So welcome to the podcast, Greg.
Thank you so much for having me.
I guess the first question is, what made you decide to write this book?
Well, I'd been having success with a lot of runners, and people kept saying, you got to write this down. You got to write this down. I said, I don't have time coaching all these runners. So finally, I was pushed to kind of get it done. And the real impetus was I kind of felt like we knew a lot about the X's and O's of training. We learned a lot from the great coaches and physiologists, and there's lots of things from the past that we felt we understood. But the biggest challenge was, how do you make it fit you? Because you're different, right? Each one of us is different. If we train in a group, we know we all have different strengths and weaknesses. And also life. You're not a robot. So the same runner doesn't show up each day to do a run. So that ability to kind of make those modifications to training was what I was doing in my own coaching. And so the book was sort of like, well, I want it to be something that a runner could use, more like a workbook than here are training plans for you to follow. It's more like, here are training plans, but here's how to modify them based on your individual needs. So that was kind of the impetus. And that's why the name was You Only Faster, because it was about you getting faster because you made these adjustments to training, and that makes training go a lot better.
Is it for people then who've maybe already done a little bit of training program work?
I think so.
Yeah.
I feel like, experience drives the changes that you will make. And so the more training cycles you go through, the more you learn about yourself. And that makes it easier to apply the principles that are in the book. So certainly a brand new runner would derive some benefit, but certainly the more, somebody who's done a few training plans and really has a goal they're not achieving, it's a really good fit for that type of runner.
That's funny you
Oh.
should mention that.
Yeah, funny you should mention that. Yeah, so anyway, maybe we'll get into that. I guess we should probably start with the beginning of the book. Like it's a 6-step process, and step 1 is that runners should be realistic about selecting the amount of time they have for training. So is that a problem that you frequently encounter, that like that most people are just too their hopes are way too high, or they put the bar too high and they just select a training plan that doesn't fit their schedule?
Yeah, we're all busy, and most of the people that I work with are working professionals with families and other things, and we usually pick a training plan for when everything is going right. But the trouble is, it doesn't always go right. In fact, a fair number of weeks across your training cycle will inevitably require some adjustments. So I try to tell athletes to pick a plan that looks very doable and has some wiggle room in it, so that if things do get crazy in your life, you're still able to get the training in and you don't beat yourself up because you didn't. So if you choose a plan that requires your entire week to go perfectly, and if something doesn't, you can't train as much, you feel like you failed. And that's a negative for runners. So I prefer them to select a plan that's very doable, even on weeks that are sort of moderately challenging. That usually is a plan that you'll be more consistent with. And we know if you just stack successful week on top of successful week on top of successful week, you can build yourself into a completely different runner over just a few weeks.
Would that be like in terms of the number of days that you would have them look at, or do you want them to sort of even go down to like how many hours they have to train per week?
Both of those. So when I built my system, I wanted to have a range for everything. So it wasn't you have to run this many days per week. It was, well, here's a range. So say 3 to 4 days per week, as opposed to you only run 3 or you have to run 4. I wanted there to be that wiggle room. So I think a person can look at the number of days per week and find a plan that's going to fit. Even if you miss a day, you're not going to feel bad about it. And the same with the volume. So each day, I think there has to be a range, because some days, you feel great, you have a lot of time, you can do the highest volume. But some days you're tired, or maybe you're really busy, you don't have the time, or you're very stressed, then maybe you would just do the shorter end of the volume. So I think for an athlete, you have to think about all of those things. What's the maximum number of days that I could run in a week if everything went great? But also I want to know I don't have to do that many in case my week gets crazy. And the same thing for volume. Again, we don't have to get so stuck on being rigid. And I think that's a challenge for most of us that are sort of goal driven, is we feel like I have to do it or else it's a failure. And I know it's a little bit more, it's a more gray area than the black and white of that, have to get it all done exactly as it's written.
I guess the thing we were doing last year, I think it was a 6-day-a-week training program. And what we do is we evaluate each day's training as sort of green, yellow, or red, based upon did we deliver it? Did we kind of deliver it, but we're not feeling like we really had a struggle or something like that, or we partially delivered it, or we didn't deliver it at all. And then if you have some reds on the board, you can look down previous weeks and go, okay, like my training sucked over the last 2 days. I missed a workout and the other workout was useless. And then you get a real downer on yourself. And then what we would do is go, no, look back over all those greens. Like you've still got 80% plus of greens. And that's your body of work is still good, so to speak. And I guess that's another way of doing what you were talking about, which is basically try to be realistic.
Yeah, it is. And you have to make those adjustments. I have a video, which runner showed up today? because you never know each day when
Mhm.
you start your run how you're going to feel. And making those adjustments can make more of those red days turn to yellow or green. So you at least feel like you had success with the day. You got the most
Yeah.
from that day, even if it was less than your ideal because you worked with your body.
Very quickly in the book, you bring a new concept to us. I think it was new to both Liz and I, which I think you term PRE,
Mm-hmm.
personal running evaluation. Yeah,
That's right.
personal running evaluation, which is sort of at a basic level, a little inventory on yourself, a self-assessment. And the first sort of part of that is using your terms. Are you a speedster, an endurance monster, or a combo runner? So what are these and why are they important?
Yeah, as I coached more and more runners, I started to see that the bulk of us are somewhat similar in our workouts that are short and fast and our ones that are long and continuous. Same with races. We're kind of equally matched from 5K, 10K, half marathon, marathon. But a lot of us skew toward one thing or another. So, me, for example, I skew toward being more of a speedster. I like the short, fast repetitions. My 5K time relative is better than my marathon time. So I know for me, that suits my sort of physiology and psychology better. Whereas I have training partners and they're more endurance monster, what I call endurance monsters. They're the ones who they perform better in the long continuous runs, the longer races. And you see this sometimes if you train people in a group, they might have the same performance level in a race, but how they actually perform within different types of workouts can be different. So my
Mhm.
buddy, who's an endurance monster, if we do an endurance monster oriented workout, like a steady state run, something that's going to be, say, an hour at a steady pace, that's going to be a better workout for him. It's going to be a big challenge for me because I'm a speedster. The
Mhm.
reverse is the case where if we go to the track and do a speed workout, that's an easier workout. I can perform better than he does. So that's what I started to see with these different runners. And I thought, you know what? I need to incorporate that knowledge into their training. And if I do that, then the training fits the athlete better. The athlete has a better result from the training because their expectation and understanding how that workout's going to affect them is better. And thus, they're more confident. They're more motivated. They're excited. They have fewer of those bad runs that steal your motivation.
Okay, so now here is where my personal consultation comes in. So you heard from my story at the beginning that I trained with another coach and he used to use your website all the time to like compare our race times. So we would always do about at least twice during the year. And it was usually at the beginning of cross country season and sort of like towards the middle of cross country season. We would do these two tests. He would make us run a mile on the track and then we would have like a 10-minute recovery and he would make us run a 400. And then based on that, like he would go and plug all these numbers into your calculator. And then, he came back and he told me that I was, I was not a speedster. I was probably an endurance monster. And later, I found later like, he used that same, I guess, going to reference different race times. And I found out that like out of 5K and 10K, I was actually better at the 5K than I am at the 10K if you look at the equivalent times. But if you go down to like a 1500 meter, which I've raced, like I'm not as good as I should be. And then if you go all the way up to like, long easy runs have always been my absolute strength. Like I love them and I can go forever. Like I could do a 3-hour easy run every weekend and it would be fine. But as soon as you start giving me things like you just said, like a 1 hour like marathon pace or some kind of thing like that, it's like completely demolishing. Like just completely I have no energy for anything afterwards. It's really interesting because also in racing, the marathon is just a constant struggle, and all the marathons that I've done well in, it's because like I almost didn't do any training, which is actually terrible.
Mm-hmm.
So what category do I fall into? Like, am I one of those like combo runners, or like, what am I exactly?
Yeah, I would certainly start you off with the thought that if you are combo, you're combo leaning speedster for sure, and maybe even a speedster, and then modify some of those workouts so that they fit you a little bit better, so you can get more volume of quality in those different training zones. Often that will bleed over into future better continuous runs and hopefully performance in the marathon. So in the book, I talk about Jordan Horn. There's a little segment on him, and he was the same way. I thought he was an endurance monster, and I trained him that way, and he didn't improve that much. And then I looked back at the training and realized I think he's more of speedster oriented. I trained him differently the next year. He made huge improvements. So sometimes it's just that little tweak that can make the big difference in training. And maybe that's what you have to think about for your marathon and breaking 3 hours is maybe there's just a few little tweaks that I can have a better or higher quality workout, and thus I'll get that stimulus to adapt to a faster runner.
So if you're able to evaluate that you're a speedster, for example, does that mean you should do more speedy runs because you're good at them and you're playing to your force, or that you should do more endurance runs and kind of cover off your weakness?
It means really three things. So in my mind, at least, I like to work on weaknesses early in the training cycle. So if you were more of a speedster, then you would do a lot more kind of endurance type training early in the training cycle. You would do more speed closer to the race because, again, you'll be more successful in those workouts. It'll build your confidence, etc. So that's one kind of strategy that you can use. The other is that you sprinkle in a little bit more workouts that are your strength, even if you're getting ready for a race distance that's not your strength. So you're a good example. You're just like I am. So if you're getting ready for the marathon, you have to do workouts to prepare you for the marathon, but you can sprinkle in some more 5K, 10K type workouts because you know they suit you really well. You'll adapt to them. That's your benefit. But you still do have to do some of those workouts that are not your strength. But, and this is the critical part, you change your expectation for those runs. So you don't have the same expectation of performance as your training partner who's an endurance monster. Your level of success is gauged differently. So again, I go back to my training part. If we're doing a tempo run and he's 10 seconds in front of me at the end, I'm probably happy with that because that's a workout that he would perform well in and I wouldn't. So I changed my expectation. But if we're on the track and he's 10 seconds ahead of me, that wouldn't be good for me because I should be ahead of him. So sometimes I find with athletes, it's almost a mental game where if you get the training right, they have the right expectation going into these big challenging workouts that are not their type. And so they come out of it more confident. They don't beat themselves up because they weren't able to perform as well as their training partners.
Okay.
Is your personal running evaluation, your evaluation as a speedster or an endurance preferable person, is it cast in stone?
No, certainly. And we evolve over time, right? So certainly, you have younger runners may present one way and then you train for 20 years and you may be a different type of runner. And people often switch events too, right? Younger runners might be running shorter races and then they move to the marathon. And sometimes we move back down to shorter races because of age or whatever. So it is an ongoing. That's why I like to do it after every training cycle. Like you guys were saying, you're doing. You're looking at your latest training cycle. You're saying what worked for us, what didn't, what will we modify? That's the evaluation. That should inform the next training cycle.
And so let's say for modifying the workouts that are my weakness. So like, for example, lactate threshold, totally my weakness, or like marathon pace, is breaking them up into intervals rather than having them one continuous run. Would that be a good way to go about it? Or is it like better in terms of then performing well in your race to have these? Because oftentimes like lactate threshold is continuous and so is marathon pace. It's like go and run 16K at marathon pace or go and run 20K at marathon pace or those kinds of things. Like what if it's broken up into like 4 times 5K at marathon pace? Like is that helpful or is that not going to be helpful in the race?
It's very helpful. And you should do that in the early part of your training, right? So when you're doing any of those goal pace runs or lactate threshold training as a speedster, break those up into accomplishable segments so that you can run at a high quality for you for that tempo, right? Whatever that pace is for you, you're able to do that with a high quality, take a little break, do it again, do it again. So you get more total volume in doing that way. If you do it continuous, typically you either can't hold that pace and slow down, which is not what we want, certainly not if you're practicing marathon pace, or you have to push too hard to maintain the pace, which is not what we want from that type of controlled workout either. So for me with speedsters, I like to do more repetitions early at that pace and then throw in a continuous one every third or fourth week. See how you feel, see how you perform in that, then go back to some repetitions and then do it again. So you kind of sneak up on the continuous running, whereas an endurance monster, they would hate that. They want to do the continuous. Give me more continuous running. I don't want to take a break. I don't want to stop. So that little subtle difference, it could mean that instead of that 16K goal pace run really wearing you out mentally and physically, you might be able to do 20K 4 times 5K with a little break. So you're actually getting more volume in at goal pace. While it's not continuous, you're still getting more volume. And hopefully 3 or 4 weeks down the road, you'd be able to maybe change that to doing, 2 times 10K or something like that. So I like sneaking up on it that way. Typically, it's better for the runner's brain. And I find protecting the runner's brain through the training process is really important. So you stay motivated, you stay excited, and you are better able to tolerate the challenges that come with challenging yourself.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with the mental thing. I mean, I'm a guy who seems to find that, I'm either going to take on the world and qualify for the Olympics based on my last training performance, or that's it, I'm finished. I need to retire, based on my last performance. It's terrible, really. And you're doing it to yourself, but you kind of can't help it. You go, no, neither of these things is true.
Yeah. It's our lizard brain. We have a focus of our brain that's fear driven. So it always wants to hold on to the negative more than the positive. That's why I have an article or video on creating your awesomeness journal, where you write down all these great things you do. So when you do start beating yourself up, just go back and check that out. Then you'll remind yourself, hey, I'm really good.
We did that a while ago, didn't we? We read Karagacha's book, Strong, not her recent book, the one before that.
Yeah.
And she talked about confidence journals.
Yeah, exactly.
But awesomeness journal sounds even better.
It does, yeah.
Especially for you, Liz. You never tell everybody you're awesome. I'm always telling everybody that I'm awesome.
Yeah, it's because I haven't been keeping a journal, so I need to start that like more consistently. I'll be like, okay, I have an agenda. I'll start doing that every day. I'll try and write something that, that went well in the training or whatever. And it just, I fall off the bandwagon really, really fast. A couple of days and then I've forgotten to do it altogether. So yeah, I need to work on that. Let's talk about training zones, because you have 4 zones that you use: endurance, stamina, speed, and sprint. Why do you use these instead of, like, let's say, like paces, like 5K pace, 10K pace, 1500 meter pace?
Well, it kind of goes back to physiology, and my 4 zones are really an adaptation from Dr. David Martin's zones that he has in his book, Better Training for Distance Runners. I just named them different so they weren't so scientific sounding, but that was the basis of it. And if you look at physiology, 5K pace is not equal for everybody, right? Not just the pace, but how long it takes. So if you are running like they do now, 12 minutes and a half for 5K, you're running as hard as you can for 12 and a half minutes. Whereas many runners, they have to run as hard as they can for 30 minutes to finish a 5K. That's a totally different energy system and zone. So I like to think of it in these zones, not based on marathon pace or half marathon pace. I like to think, where is that physiologically? Like you talked about the lactate threshold. Lactate threshold occurs around 1 hour race pace for almost all runners. Now, for if you're an elite half marathoner, that's your half marathon pace.
Yeah.
For the rest of us, it's not, right? That's more like 10K pace or 15K pace or whatever. It's short of that. So it's kind of varies. So I like to come back to where is that in the physiological zone? And then I can prescribe training that's the same for each runner. Because if you say, go do 30 minutes at 10K pace, well, for a really fast runner, they're going to race a 10K, right? Whereas for everybody else, they wouldn't be. So they would get two different kind of stimulus. So I like to break it up in the zones because of that. I call it race pace relativity. It's all relative, right? Half marathon pace could feel really hard for one person, like a 1 hour half marathoner, or it could be more like marathon pace for Kipchoge if he was a 2 hour half marathoner. So it kind of, you have to think of it that way.
In the training zones that you give, there's a gap. We notice there's a space. I think in between and I guess this speaks to some of the things that we've learned about, do most of your training slower than you really think and do a bit of your training faster and get out of the middle zone. It's having a space kind of forces you out of the middle zone. And I assume that that's what that is. But I noticed that it's a very inconvenient middle zone for our 3 hour marathon target, because the 3 hour race pace, you're going to have to do race pace runs, falls right in the middle of the no man's land, the no run zone that you have in your book. So what do we do about that?
Yeah, so it doesn't matter if that's where your goal pace is. Obviously, you're doing your goal pace running in that zone because that's what you have to do. What it really came from was Jack Daniels, and he talks about the danger zone, like people training just a little bit too fast on their easy runs all the time creates a lot of musculoskeletal stress. And so that kind of no man's land is what he was talking about. And this is what we see with a lot of new runners, right? They get fit, they keep challenging themselves, they get faster, and all of a sudden, all of their runs become kind of in that zone. And that's a great way to get injured and plateau your performance. So there is a little bit of a gap there that we prefer not to spend a ton of time in. But if that's where your race pace lives, then you have to do running. But obviously, you're not going to do that all the time. You're doing that infrequently.
Yeah, because I can guarantee that my musculoskeletal system is not happy after I do marathon pace. So.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess it's this thing that you can often, I'm speaking to maybe more the beginners who are listening to the podcast, you can get a run and you go, oh, okay, that feels like a good workout. And you get the sensation in your body that tells you that that's the right zone you should be training in, which is probably lying to you.
Yeah, because when you're a new runner, the effort is very high just to run. And you get used to that effort level as being what you associate with a run. Yeah. But as your fitness improves, the effort level should actually come down on those runs. And you begin to get that ability that those of us who have run for a long time, we know our effort levels. We know how to distribute our effort. But newer runners are kind of stuck in just a little bit too hard of an effort because that's what they were exposed to. That was what a run felt like in the beginning. So that's why with new runners, I like to start blending in some different efforts. So they start to feel out, okay, this is a higher effort, this is a lower effort. And they learn those different effort levels because it serves them very, very well in the long term.
That makes so much sense to me, because we had a runner that joined our club during the winter, and he was always asking, like, okay, so what's the next training and what is the training? And I think at one point I'd given him the whole schedule, and on our team training schedule, we have like a easy run Sunday morning and we have an easy run on Thursday evening. And he said, oh, I'm not going to go to those because I just don't feel like that's going to be a workout. It's like he had to, every run had to be like a workout. So so I guess that's where that comes from, is because probably every time he would restart running, it would be hard, and then he would just feel like it just always has to be hard. So that's.
But that's the evolution of running, right? Is you realize the bulk of it is not hard. It's not, the big challenge is getting out the door. It's the consistency in it. And it's the sprinkling in of these more quality efforts across the training cycle. That's what makes the big difference. Because then you stay healthy, you get the biggest adaptation from those specialty workouts.
Yeah.
Something that we haven't done in our training very specifically that maybe we need to think about for the next cycle is carb-free long runs, so-called. Somebody referred to them as depletion runs because you're running with no top up of your carbohydrates, and you deplete out. A good idea or not? And if so, I think you probably say yes. How often should we do them?
Yeah, for seasoned runners and runners who have kind of hit a plateau in the marathon, so this would be what we're talking about, Liz. It's a great thing to start introducing, and you can ease into it. I have an article on my website called No Fuel, Slow Fueling, so you can check that article out. It kind of goes through exactly how to do it, but you just start to wean yourself off of fast-acting carbohydrates during your long, easy runs. And what that does is it forces the body to make adaptations to preserve those limited carbohydrate stores and get more efficient as you run. It's not fun mentally because obviously you're going to get more tired early than you would if you were fueling, but the long run benefit in the long run is good. And you don't do it through the entire cycle because you definitely want to practice your marathon nutrition and all of those kind of dress rehearsal things. But early in the plan, like if you're running 90 minutes to 2 hours, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to tolerate that without any extra fueling. You have plenty of fuel on board. You just may not feel as good. But again, that's about expectation. You go into those runs saying, I know I'm not going to feel as good. My pace isn't going to be as high. I'm going to get fatigued earlier in the run. But there's value in that mental stress, right? There's value in that.
I guess, and you have to say, and I need to be careful to refuel afterwards.
For sure, because that's a big part of the adaptation as well. The body is saying, I need to replace this fuel tank. And so whatever you take in, it will not only replace it, but it adds more to it. So it's another great training adaptation.
So I guess you wouldn't do that on the days that you have marathon pace in your long run though, right?
Only easy runs, easy long runs, nothing where you're doing specialty running, nothing where you're practicing goal pace. Those are where you want to work on your marathon nutrition. You've got to dial that in, make sure you've got all the timing, exactly how you're doing it. So it's only on those runs where you're just going out for time. You don't even care about the pace, right? You're just getting in the run. Those are ones where you can begin to wean yourself off. And some people can never do it. They always have to have fast-acting carbohydrates. And some people can do it really quickly, and they can run 3 hours with nothing. So we're all a little bit different in how we do that. Typically, speedsters struggle more with the depletion runs than endurance monsters. But again, any of it can be helpful. Again, for the more experienced runners, you wouldn't do this with a new runner. With a new runner, you want them to be successful in the long runs. They just need to get those in, and you want them to get them in as high quality as you can.
Okay. So is there any sort of like maximum frequency for these depletion runs? Like, you wouldn't do them every weekend. Would you do them every third weekend or?
Well, it depends. If you've really been fueling a lot, then it could take you longer to wean yourself off. If you don't fuel a lot, then you probably can do them more frequently. It's another thing you might just kind of play by ear. So if you're going into a run, you say, boy, I've had a tough work week. Don't do a depletion run. Fuel yourself so you have a positive run. But if you're feeling great and like, okay, I want to see how I feel after 90 minutes or 2 hours without fueling, or fueling half of what I normally do, that's a perfect time to do it. For me, I like to get in 4 or 6 of them throughout, say, 16, 20 weeks before a marathon. So it's once every 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay.
So we're going to have to stop the ice cream stop in the middle of our Thursday runs.
Yeah, but that run's not long, so we can keep that.
Yes, summer we stop at the ice cream stall. Hey, running has to be fun.
That's right.
Yeah, that's the fun part. But Yeah, we don't get to do it really during marathon training though, because usually like every run has like some kind of purpose. It's either really long or it's, got some lactate threshold or so yeah.
Mhm.
We do it fell off the wagon last summer, I know that. But anyway,
Yeah,
we do
yeah,
it like now.
Yeah,
yeah.
it's definitely if somebody's plateaued in the marathon, I have that article, Fixing the Fade. And one of the things it talks about are these sort of no carb runs, which can be one solution to get people to
Yeah.
adapt to a higher level.
Yeah, it's a piece for our puzzle, I think.
Yeah.
Worth a try anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say racing during your training cycle. Because tune-up races are important, and I think you mentioned that. You say that you should have an extra rest day after a race. Why would you need that?
Because the biggest risk with tune-up races is that you get injured from coming back to training too soon. So most people, it's great to do those tune-up races, but sometimes they don't respect that it was a hard effort. Their musculoskeletal system is tired. They see the training on the calendar, so they want to jump back in. They don't want to miss any training. So I find that I try to be super conservative after those races because I know the worst thing that could happen is them get an injury. It's way worse than, oh, we had a couple of days or I had to skip one of my quality sessions in that week. I don't even care about that because I know it's the body of work that's going to produce that race performance. So I'm hypersensitive to injuries. I just feel like if you can not get injured, then you're going to have a better training cycle. And some of that just means being more careful in training, particularly after these big sessions like a tune-up race.
So how many, let's say easy run days would you usually give after a tune-up race? Because usually most of the races are on Sundays around here. So
yeah, so it depends on the athlete, obviously. But if you had kind of an intermediate athlete that then I would probably, they wouldn't do anything of any quality until Thursday. So I'd have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday as recovery, and then they would be ready to go on that Thursday. Again, it doesn't hurt them to do that. Nobody gets injured from a little extra rest. So it's definitely smart to be conservative in your recovery whenever you've stressed the musculoskeletal system. I know it can be hard because particularly if you have a great race, right? You feel good, you want to get out there, you want to do it, but that's where you got to hold back, which is what coaches do, right? We hold you back when you're going to do too much too soon, and then, push you when you're ready to go. So I usually like to have 2 or 3 recovery days. Again, it could vary. Some people that might be all for cross training. Some people might be, an hour run is a recovery run for them. It just depends on the athlete.
okay.
Typical runner, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, so that means if we have a 10K race to tune up, I'll have one day off afterwards. You've just said I should have 3, but
well, you can have one day
is better
off
than
and then
none.
maybe run easy for 2 days,
Okay.
and then you're
That's not so
ready
bad.
to ease back into
That's not
your
so bad. Yeah.
not days off per se, but
Yeah, you
just
did say
recovery.
before you do quality. So before you're going to do
Yeah.
a track session or something.
Yeah. So usually I maintain the frequency. So if they run on Tuesdays, then we would run on Tuesday. It would just be an easy short run on Tuesday as opposed to
A workout.
Yeah, we're not so bad at that, I guess. If we just feel our bodies, we go, okay, we ran one day off, easy day after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The more kind of type A you are, then the more you have to pre-program those recovery periods. Because if you're left to your own devices, you're going to run too much. So you have to force it.
Yeah.
Go ahead and write it in your calendar. Recovery days, I'm just going to run 20, 30 minutes easy.
We find accountability buddies are good for that.
Mm-hmm.
Say, hey, no running tomorrow,
Yeah.
Or hey, you have to run, sometimes to get you to show up. We found that's pretty good. We noticed at our club, a lot of the junior runners, when you get into training, they don't know what pace they should be running. And in your book, you refer to the quite well known, but very nice online tool that exists, the McMillan race calculator or running calculator or McMillan calculator. How is this useful to people and how does it work? Tell us all a bit about it.
Yeah, when I started coaching, I was lucky in that I worked with a real wide spectrum of runners, some that were really fast, some that were really slow, some that were just like me. And so it became a challenge to tell them, well, how fast should you be running, right? Everybody wants to know, what are my paces for this run? And I was in graduate school studying exercise physiology, and that was essentially my research, was trying to make this connection between physiology and training paces and race performance. And so I kind of worked through different modeling to come up with, okay, no matter the type of runner you are, I can prescribe a pace range that should be optimal for what you're trying to achieve. So it didn't matter if you were a 2.5 hour marathoner or a 2.5 hour half marathoner. You tell me that, I can get you slotted into the correct pace range that most likely is going to give you the type of stimulus that that workout calls for. And so I just had it for myself. I had a binder with all these sheets of paper based on, whatever your race times were. And I could look up and then tell my runners what that would be. And then my buddy programmed it and put it online. And then it's sort of become popular since then. But it was really, selfish on my part, because I was working with people and I knew as a runner myself, you got to give them some idea, a ballpark of what is an appropriate pace for this type of workout. So that's really where it came from. And I'm happy so many runners have found it beneficial.
And so is there any kind of just kind of a general rule? I remember when I was training with my other coach, he would say, so every time you move up a race distance or down a race distance, you had to add or subtract 10 to 15 seconds per kilometer. Is there any basis to that, or does it depend if you're on the faster end or on the slower end?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of those rules of thumb that came through the 1950s, 60s, 70s, before computers and exercise science was really what it is now. So there's a lot of those to kind of get you in that ballpark. Again, it varies a little bit based on the type of runner. So like you would experience, right? As you move up, you're probably not able to maintain the same change in pace that other runners are. You have a bigger drop off, for example, in
Why
the
are you
longer
laughing,
races.
Liz?
It's much bigger.
Yeah. And then other people be the same way, right? Endurance monsters would struggle going the other direction. They wouldn't be able to maintain that. So any of those, I feel like everything's good if it puts you in the ballpark. It gives you an idea to have a successful performance, and then be able to sit down and evaluate it and say, okay, that felt good, that didn't feel good, what would I change going forward? That's what all the rules of thumb and calculators are for. It's just get you in the ballpark.
Since you first put the running calculator together, have you sort of validated it with further data or further athletes, or?
Yeah, I did a bunch of adjustments to it through probably the first 10 years that I had it, based on what I was seeing in my athletes. And then I would kind of run numbers again and et cetera, and tried to refine it. And I've been real happy with it until the last probably 3 years, when the super shoes came in. Because the super shoes screw it all up. Because if you're racing in super shoes and training in regular shoes, it's kind of skews it a little bit. So we've been joking, I need a little checkbox whether you're running in super shoes or not, then it adjusts the paces for you.
Do you have an idea? Is that giving you any ideas about what it looks like in the real world that super shoes are doing?
Yeah, a lot more research is coming out, right? And definitely showing, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8% improvements in runners. It's just incredible. And it varies again based on the runner. Some find more benefit, particularly if they're more of a springy runner. They find a lot of benefit. More of the shufflers find a little different benefit. But, oh yeah, it's huge. I mean, I was coaching a guy, and he was a fast runner, trying to go to the Olympics. And I thought he would run 2 hours and 18 minutes for the marathon or something like that. And he ran 2:14. And
wow.
I was like, I thought I was an okay coach, but I don't think I'm that good.
That's out of the ballpark.
And it was the shoes. I mean, literally, I felt like the shoes made that big a difference. And that's what we're seeing, right? World records are being broken. People are running so fast. So I think the calculator works, but I do need to do some adjustments for super shoes.
So then what do you suggest to your athletes about super shoes? Because I think like most of us, they like, well, I don't know. Let me speak for myself. I put them in a box. They're like spikes, you know, like like track spikes. You put them in a box and you take them out on race day. They're your special, like I feel like I can conquer the world shoes. But should you train in them more, or should you be doing like all your quality in those shoes? Because if you're plugging in your race time and your race time was in those shoes and now you're getting all your training pieces, I guess it's, you know, it's following the curve of like whatever time you did in the race with you did with the shoes. So do you have like do you suggest anything to your runners, or does it not matter that much because it's training?
Yeah, we've been experimenting a little bit. Obviously, any goal pace stuff, any fast running where you want to have a really high performance, wear the shoes you're going to race in. That's a great way to get used to it, to feel it out, to have a higher performance. You might be able to run, 2, 3, 4 seconds per mile faster. That's great training if you're able to do that with at the same effort level and the same sort of stress on the body. And then some athletes are even using them in easy runs because the foam is so protective of the musculoskeletal system. So some runners that are struggling with their musculoskeletal system, getting fatigued, they're using it on easy runs. And then some people are, like you say, that's just specialty. That is just, I'm doing a race or my dress rehearsal, and that's the only time I'm wearing them. So it's really variable. And some people seem to respond really well to training in them. Some people don't like it. So it's another thing about running, right? You just have to adjust based on what your experience is.
I think my experience is I absolutely love them. They're great, but I can't afford to be running in them all the time. It costs a darn fortune.
Yeah.
Are you listening, Saucony? We need a sponsorship for our podcast.
Get him some shoes. The man needs some shoes. Come on.
Okay, so you talk about not tapering, you talk about peaking, which is very cool actually in the book. I think that you use a language instead of saying, well, you're going down. No, what you're doing is you're trying to get your performance to get to the top, which is a great spin on the psychology and the terminology. So you mentioned that our bodies and minds like consistency and we should maintain frequency in runs leading up to marathon. But if you're a masters athlete like Liz, or you're a veteran crumbly athlete like me, should we still be, doing this towards the end of our training cycle leading up to a marathon?
Yeah, I think you definitely want to, reduce the training load in the last 7 to 14 days, just to freshen up a little bit, restock all the energy stores, get mentally ready as well. We talk about reducing the training volume so you kind of rest up, but you keep the engine revved with some of those quality workouts in the last couple of weeks. And that's where most people mess up with their kind of taper or their peaking phase, is that they just taper too much. So they take themselves out of their normal training rhythm. And you know how it is. If you miss a couple of days of running, if you've been consistently running, you come back and you feel like, I feel like I've never run before. So, if you take somebody out of their rhythm, they just feel very flat. And the reduction in training can make you feel a little flat anyway. So I find usually that kind of peaking works really well for runners.
So keeping the number of days up and taking each day down a little bit.
Yeah, so reducing the volume of each day, but probably maintaining the frequency, the number of days per week, or potentially saying, okay, the last 2 weeks, I'm going to run one less day per week, or whatever you find mentally would work for you. And then every 3 or 4 days, you do something of quality just to kind of keep the engine revved. You don't get out of your rhythm of doing something of quality every few days. And then you can, if you're really tired, say a month or 3 weeks out from your race, then you can begin that peaking phase earlier. You can begin to reduce the volume earlier. Or if you find, boy, I feel so flat and I don't like it mentally, it just takes me out of a rhythm, then shorten that peaking period, and that may work for you. So for me, I like a short tapering period. That works better for me. But I know some other runners, they like it a little bit longer. So you have to kind of vary. I think mostly the mistake is tapering too much and feeling flat and getting out of your rhythm. But it depends on how fatigued you feel or if you're kind of battling an injury.
So in terms of actually training, there is a set of workouts that you call pace change workouts, where within the same workout, you're changing the pace up. And you say that this will help with the marathon fade. So how does this help? And where should we put this into our training?
Yeah, so pace change is a great way to just challenge the body to adapt faster. So, running continuous is good, but then running a little faster, a little slower, which is why we do speed workouts. It's why we do hill workouts. It's any of that where you're kind of able to do a higher quality, bigger volume of higher quality than you could do if you were doing it continuously. So I like the pace change for a lot of marathoners, particularly marathoners like you who are trying to break through a barrier. They are seasoned, they are experienced. Pace change within long runs is a great way to get a boost, whether it's picking it up for 5 minutes a little bit faster and then slowing back to your regular pace, or it can be more organized like Jack Daniels does, 3 miles at threshold and then 10 miles at goal pace and then 2 miles at threshold. There's lots of different ways that you can add pace change, but for a lot of runners, that pace change can be, it's fun as well, which a lot of new runners really like.
Like a fartlek type of...
Kind of like a fartlek, anything where you're changing pace can be beneficial from that standpoint. So I like that for beginning runners because they feel like they're training a little bit more. And I like it for seasoned runners because, again, you've gone and done, like you said, you could do a 3-hour run every weekend. So now the evolution for you is how can those become of a little higher quality without it overstressing me? You talk about threshold being an issue. Well, hey, throwing in 5 times 5 minutes at threshold within a 2.5, 3-hour run with, say 3 or 4 or 5 minutes in between, that might be interesting for you. Across your week, it gives you what, 20, 25 more minutes of running at that lactate threshold. But yet you may not feel it the way you would if you go and do like a tempo run.
Yeah, because we were following advanced marathoning and the lactate threshold runs. They start at 6K. Yeah. 6K seemed to be okay. I could successfully accomplish those. But then 8K, well, it was a bit hit and miss, and definitely 10K. I was never successful with that one. And then it went up to 11K, which I just wrote that off completely.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because, Pete Fitzinger was really an endurance monster. That was his thing. So for him, that would have been super easy, right? It would have been he would have the exact opposite response to that workout that you did. Again, pulling out that differences between the two of you and why that workout may be a challenge. But I bet, it'd be interesting if you decide to do it. So if you were to do that same program, once you got to 8, then you would say, okay, now I'm going to do 2 times 5K, and then I'm going to do 3 times 5K, and you break it up like that and see what your experience is. Again, nobody knows what's exactly right. You're just trying to have an educated guess as to what may benefit you.
Yeah, we were kind of thinking of maybe going down that way because we do like the plan because it has these medium long runs, and we thought those were beneficial because it means you don't just have one long run every week. You also usually have 1 or 2 medium long runs during the week. It was just really then the volume of the continuous marathon pace and the continuous lactate threshold, they were just, not achievable for me. Alan achieved some of them. He did pretty well, and my other training partner Guillaume, he was fine, but me, I was just I would just be crumbling in the back over there.
You're sensible, so you get to a point where the training is probably subtracting from your fitness, and so then you say, okay, I need to stop. Whereas I go, no, I came to do this. I'll run it like it's the last race of my life. I delivered the 10K lactate threshold, and then I'm completely dead for about a week.
Yep.
So that's my mental getting in the way. Liz looks at me and goes, "Oh, he's all right. He's fine. He's delivered the run. He did the training." He doesn't realize I can barely walk for 2 days afterwards.
Well, that's what I'm always asking, because athletes will just send me the results, the paces or the times that they hit. And I said, well, that's fine, but how did you feel doing it? Because it's way different, right? You accomplished that 10K
Yep.
and you really had to bring your
Yep.
A+ game versus you were very controlled doing it.
Yeah.
Totally different training
It
stimulus.
is, absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah.
So that's that's kind of what the book is about, right? It's
Yep.
about figure yourself out, learn how to execute the training in a way that is the most positive for you. And then over time, you'll be able to do more and of higher quality. And if you do that enough, you can achieve the goals that you have.
Well, one of the things that you do have in your book is sort of a little bit of discussion upon what might be feasible for you. So you're a new runner. We see it in our club where people come, they suddenly get starry-eyed about their running because they improve enormously when they first start running.
Yep.
And then they go, one fateful day, we're out on a run, and they go, I wonder if I would be able to qualify for Boston. And your book, you actually talk about, how much you improve over what sort of period of time and what could be feasible. Like, are you so far out that it doesn't matter what you would do, you probably have difficulty? If we've got listeners who are sitting and going, okay, so I've been doing a little bit of running, I wonder if I could qualify for Boston. What would you tell people from your book about how they can assess the feasibility of their reach?
Yeah, it's a good question. The challenge for the coach is we don't know the future. We have no idea. I've coached charity marathon groups where you have 50 people show up and they all appear to be the same. And then some of them just take off in their improvement, genetics, whatever it is.
Yeah. So never say never.
Never say never. So I never like to say no. I mean, there are some things that are unreal. I'm not going to run a sub 2-hour marathon. We know that.
Well, never say never.
I'm going to say that.
Never
right?
say
I'm
never.
going to say, oh, can I break 3 hours again or whatever? I'm going to be somewhat reasonable in what I would suggest. So what I've been doing of late is I've been saying, okay, you can use the McMillan calculator. You can put in your times. You can see what it predicts for other distances. If it's a Boston qualifier, you know what time you have to hit. And then let's start the training cycle with that as our goal pace. And I always have a sequence of goal pace workouts across the training plan. So it kind of starts with shorter, more doable goal pace workouts, and then gets more challenging across the plan. And those results tell us, is it reasonable or not? So some people will find, oh, I'm really hitting these goal paces. Okay, maybe that wasn't unreasonable that I could run this. Other people start to go, my inner GPS is telling me that I cannot maintain this for the marathon. Maybe it's going to take me 2 more cycles before it's realistic.
I guess that's what I'm getting at. I'm getting at the second and third and fourth and fifth cycle.
Yeah.
If you go, well, the McMillan calculator, based on my current 5K performance, the McMillan calculator says I should be able to do a marathon in 3 hours and 25 minutes. Oh, I'm going to have to train hard to be able to do that. But in 5 years' time, I want to break 3 hours. Is that just an individual thing?
It's really individual. It's crazy, right? Because we see some people start running and they qualify for Boston in their first marathon. And the other people, they chase it for 10 years and never get it. So it's just so elusive that I just kind of focus back down on, okay, what is the training telling us? We can set whatever goal we want.
Yeah.
What does the training tell us? Because otherwise it can be a real negative. If I'm coaching an athlete and they say, I want to qualify for Boston, I said, that's never going to happen. That would not be pleasant for them. I would rather say, I don't know. Let's see what we need. We need to get your 5K faster. We need to get your 10K faster. We need to get your half marathon faster. We've got to build up your stamina. Maybe it's going to be 2 or 3 cycles.
Yeah. And I guess what you do is say, based upon some training you're doing this year, it should be feasible for you to get to this first milestone.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Okay. And you talk about endurance being paramount to racing success. Like, I know in the marathon, of course, endurance is super important. That's why we do so many long runs, medium long runs, all those things. But is that rule true for all the distances? And then is there a point at which you think that adding more mileage is no longer going to really help performance, that it's got to be something else?
Yeah, so it's not directly related to mileage. It's just related to endurance training. So for most people, obviously, doing a little bit more mileage will help their endurance for sure, but it's not just continuing to ramp up your mileage. It's more like, okay, now I got another year in of successful training. I'm going to stack another year and another year and another year. Because what we find are that the systems of the body that we considered endurance, so running economy, some of the cellular level changes that happen, those things can keep improving year after year after year. They don't have as quick a ceiling to get to. But a lot of the more what we consider speed oriented things, we kind of max those out quicker. And so what we find with athletes as they age is that as their endurance base gets bigger, it pushes the peak, the fastest speed higher, but the growth in the sort of speed and sprint component is not as great as in endurance. And all the Paula Radcliffe's a perfect example, right? Trained for 10, 15 years, and we saw her VO2 max didn't change that much at all, but her running economy, all of that continued to improve at great, great amounts throughout her running career. Dina Castor here in the US, another perfect example of that. So that's what that means, is that be consistent, keep that endurance going. Doesn't mean you have to run more miles, but it's just like run these miles that you can run week after week, month after month, year after year, and you give yourself you change your body over time, and that's what gives you that performance improvement.
Okay.
So we see from your book that clearly by having a more personalized, customized approach to your training plan, that you can get a lot more benefit out of that training. And your book tells us how to do it, how to go about doing that. Great. So that's good. Is there something in particular that most runners do wrong? Is there a sort of some major areas where, oh, not again, either beginner runners or even not beginner runners?
I think you alluded to it before. We are our own worst enemy, in that we don't listen to our body, we ignore the signs, we kind of don't work in accord with what our body is giving us. We kind of work against it. And whenever you do that, that's where negative runs will happen, injuries, burnout, fatigue, all of those things just don't line up. So for me, it's about getting the training that fits within that person's life schedule so that they can feel like they have a high chance of success during that training period, and then making the workouts fit the runner instead of the runner fit the workouts. That is a good way to have more positive results. And what I've found is our injury rate at McMillan Running is so low compared to the normal. Like most runners are getting injured, right? We don't have that. And I think a big part of it is the training is structured so you listen to your body more. You've got an out, so you're not forced to do training when you shouldn't. We do a ton of what we call prehab, the strength, core, mobility, all of those things. You put all that together, you have an athlete that's motivated, stays confident and excited, then they'll have a successful training cycle. And that's why we have so much, good performances out of our athletes.
Do you know what your injury rate is?
Last time we calculated, it was 8%.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. That is
crazy.
Nothing.
I think the number I have in my head for the general norm is 33%.
Yeah.
Like a third of all athletes get injured every year.
Yeah. I mean, some of the anecdotal stuff is 50%, 60%. It's crazy. And I'm talking about, not just a little niggle here and there. I'm talking about
something that stops you from
interrupted your training. You're not able to do training. No, and it was a big focus of ours for about 5 years. Was we're not going to say that being injured is okay. We really made a focused effort to show that it doesn't have to be part of training. Everybody doesn't have to get injured. And so if you do smart training, listen to your body and take care of it, you should be able to get through your training cycle without anything significant enough to create a problem.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm glad I asked you for the number. That's got to be the best piece of publicity you could possibly give out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, we just, as a runner myself, nothing worse than being the fittest spectator at your goal race.
Yeah.
So you
I
want to
know.
stay healthy. You want to be able to get out and do your running. And you guys train as a group, right? If you can't train with your group, it's horrible.
Yeah.
You feel ostracized that you lost your community.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially when it's like 2 weeks before the race
oh,
that's like supposed to be an away race,
Yeah.
and
yes.
you've been training the whole training cycle with them, and you're excited because like there's 15 of you going to the same
Yeah.
race, and yeah, 2 weeks before you get plantar fasciitis in both feet.
Yeah.
That's
Also, my wife hates me
terrible.
because I'm not fun to live with.
Right? Yes. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I feel like the best piece of advice is injuries are runner enemy number one, and you must do everything to avoid that. And there's some level of training, there's some level of recovery, there's some level of treatment, there's some level that will keep you from getting injured. And mostly it's you not listening to your inner coach saying, I still feel that I probably shouldn't run today, but I'm going to because it's on the schedule. Or
Hmm.
I'm not comfortable cutting that 1 hour run down to 45 minutes because it won't look as good in my training calendar. So I feel like feeling more empowered, that's a big part of what we try to do with our athletes is empower them to make those adjustments and know that they have the authority to make those because they feel their body. They know if they feel that little something that says, yeah, I probably should skip this run or I should shorten this run.
This is probably a really good spot to just ask you a few things about your services and the book before we give our summary for, our overall summary comments on the book. So you're talking about training programs, etc. If people want to get in on those, what should they do, Greg?
Yeah, just go to McMillanRunning.com. We have a full library of training plans, everything from 800 meters to the ultra marathon, even the in-between plans of base, speed, hills, that sort of thing. We also do coaching, so we have different levels of service depending on how much interaction that athletes want with their coach. And those are our main kind of two services that we provide. Obviously, the calculator is there too, which a lot of people use to get their paces or predict their times. And we've got runners of all abilities, from new runners up to people that are at the front end of the pack. And it's a lot of fun for sure.
And if people want to get a hold of a copy of You Only Faster, the book we've been discussing, do you have a preference where people should go to get that?
Most people go to Amazon. I think that's kind of universal now that Amazon is the best place. If you buy it off of my website, McMillanRunning.com, then I sign it for you. But most people
so it goes immediately up in value. So that's good.
I don't know about that, but it's nice to, wish people good luck in their racing. But Amazon is where most people get my books.
Okay, great. And I guess if people want to follow you, they can follow you and your activities in at McMillan.com.
Yeah, McMillanRunning.com, and of course all the social media challenges. I'm not really a social media influencer, but I definitely try to post things that could help runners.
Okay, brilliant. Great. Well, we'll just give our summary thoughts on the book and then wish you on your way, if that's okay, Greg.
Super.
Well, first of all, great title for a book. You Only Faster. And specifically, I think you said so at the start, it's pertinent. Not only is it sort of cute, but it's absolutely pertinent because it's about personalizing your training plan so for better results. So it's about you and it's about being faster at the end of the day. I think the book's good for coaches, but also anyone who's looking to get more out of their training by being smarter about their training, not just grinding harder or, doing the things that might get you injured. It also, just reading the book, gets you thinking more about why you're doing the runs that you're doing and when are you doing them and at what stage in the cycle are you doing them. It sort of provokes that kind of thinking because clearly there's a lot of that type of thinking that's gone into customizing plans and, years and years of experience. I never really thought about whether I was a speedster or an endurance monster by preference. But I can see that understanding this can enable me to have a better approach to my training and probably my recovery as well. So, it's given me that. So I would say it's a great training book from somebody who's learned from all the very best We saw the names Joe Vigil and Arthur Lydiard in your list of contacts and influences. So great stuff. Well worth the read.
Thank you.
So I'm going to echo some of that, but I'll just start with the topic. So I thought the topic was very unique. It's a great book and a great resource for especially runners who are self-coached, even runners who are coached. I mean, it's just empowering to read about these things and then feel like maybe you can contribute something to your training plan. I also recommend it to coaches because it can help maybe personalize an athlete's plan, or even just like, if you have an athlete who's plateauing, figure out why they're plateauing and help them out, give sort of like avenues that you can look at to help them, attain their Boston qualifier, if that's what they're after, or their sub 3 hour marathon. So the cover doesn't look very exciting. It's red with big white letters. I mean, it's got a runner on it, so that's always fun. But the title is really appropriate, and of course, like, who doesn't want to be a faster version of themselves? So I like the title very much. And the information I found was very well structured and understandable. And there were also a lot of like diagrams and pictures of, like, let's say the calculator that you can find online. So that was very useful, because for the people that are, more visual learners, then you have a lot of nice little charts and tables and things. The big takeaway for me was not having too many workouts that are in your weaknesses, that are like lined up one after the other. So I never really kind of thought about it, but in the next training cycle, I think I'm going to try and, go through it and see if my weaknesses are lined up too many times in the same week. So hopefully that's going to help me out.
Super.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the cover, it's interesting you mentioned the cover, because that pays homage to Jim Fixx. If you remember his original running book, Jim Fixx book on running, it was red with runner legs on it. So I always try to honor those that come before us. So that's why I chose, yes. So my book
Alan's
is
got the
trying
book
to honor him and what he did, because that was one of the first running books that I read. So that's the design. And it's funny, right? Because most book designs now have a picture on them. It's more visual, but I said, no, we got to honor our past and these people that have helped us,
Oh, that's cool. It's good to know that.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So once again, Greg, thanks incredibly for spending your valuable time with us today on the podcast. I hope all our listeners get something out of that. I know we have. We've got little personal consultations, but you can hear our little hamsters turning as we're talking to you. Chick, 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 chick. Okay, make a note. Okay, we need to do a fasting run. Okay, we need to do this breakdown for our pace runs. And we're gradually piecing the jigsaw together.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate you reading the book and your kind comments, and wonderful to chat with both of you.
Absolutely great. Thank you for listening to another episode of Running Book Reviews. A big thanks to Greg for providing copies of the books and for spending time with us today. If you'd like to leave us feedback about how we can improve the podcast, or want to suggest a book we'd like us to review in a future episode, please leave us a comment on social media. We are Running Book Reviews on Facebook and Instagram, and on Twitter we are reviews_running. Please also follow us on social media to find out about new episodes when they are released, or you can just subscribe to the podcast on your favorite streaming platform. If you've been listening to us for a while and you're wondering how you can help us out, there are a couple of ways. If you like this podcast, spread the word. Tell your friends about us and share a link, maybe of this episode or your favorite episode, with a running partner or team. You can also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts if this is how you listen, or rate us out of 5 stars on Spotify. We really appreciate written reviews on Apple Podcasts, so if you take time out to do that, we'd really appreciate that. We're also on a platform called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can check out a whole bunch of extras, takeouts, etc. The latest ones are our Moab Run. We did Moab Run the Rocks, a 3-day event, and so you can hear our experience and chat on that. And also, quite recently, a chat on goal setting, which we did off one of the books that we write on Run Your Faster Marathon and goal setting. So you can go and have a listen to that. Just go to buymeacoffee.com and search for Running Book Reviews. That's all for now from Running Book Reviews. Bye.
Bye.